Good afternoon, everybody. Shock and disbelief at the Los Angeles Herald Examiner today as the newspaper announced it was going out of business. Let's go up to the newsroom where Jim Giggins tells us why. Jim.
John, there hasn't been a time in recent memory when the Herald Examiner wasn't in serious financial difficulty. There was always the fear that one day the announcement would come that the paper had gone under. When that dreaded announcement came today, it didn't come as a total surprise to employees, but they were stunned nonetheless.
There were tears and hugs and looks of bewilderment at the Herald Examiner this afternoon. Many of the people losing their jobs had worked here most of their adult lives, like prize-winning photographer Michael Herring.
How long have you been at the Herald?
21 years.
How do you feel today?
Take the wind out of your sails, you know. A little nervous, a little worried, but I'll survive.
City Hall reporter John Schwada broke the story of Mayor Tom Bradley's tangled finances.
Yeah, I think the Times is going to carry that story on. I hope they will.
They didn't pick it up at the beginning.
No, they didn't, but I think they know now that it's a good story, and they've been covering it pretty well since then.
The Herald Examiner was always scrappy and often brilliant, but none of this was enough to save the paper. It all came down to the bottom line.
There's never been a day in the past 12 years, including today, that the quality of this newspaper didn't give us great pride. There's also never been a time, unhappily, during the past 22 years, that this newspaper has been a business success. Despite inquiries from around the world and extensive discussions with numerous parties, we're unable to find a purchaser that could provide the financial capacity to sustain this business.
One of the Herald's main problems was increased competition from regional newspapers like the Orange County Register and the Daily News, which made it even more difficult to turn a profit. With the Herald Examiner goes a bit of Los Angeles history. It was started by William Randolph Hearst in 1903. The days of Hearst and Marion Davies and the Hearst Castle were the glory years for the paper. The Herald Examiner was the nation's largest afternoon daily by 1967, before the decline began.
The last edition of the paper will come out tomorrow. Employees will get 60 days' pay. Then it's all over. Back to you in the studio.
I guess we all expected to retire here, and it's quite a shock.
The Herald Examiner will publish its own obituary tomorrow morning. That's our top story tonight on Action News at 11. Good evening, I'm Jim Lampley.
And I'm Bree Walker. This is Action News at 11. The presses are rolling for the final time tonight at the Los Angeles Herald Examiner. Today, officials formally announced the paper is folding. Sylvia Lopez reports.
The presses sat silent before their final run, but tonight the offices of the Herald Examiner were busier than ever.
I think a lot of them are waiting around for the last run, and I think they want to see it. I'm sure they probably want a copy.
There's one more tomorrow, right?
Local newsstands were busy too, with readers already snatching up a paper they won't be able to buy after Thursday.
I think it's terrible. We need two papers in the city.
I think with there only being the Times left, I don't think it's a good omen for the city.
The Herald's vice president made the official announcement at an emotional news conference today, while teary-eyed staffers listened.
There's never been a day in the past 12 years, including today, that the quality of this newspaper didn't give us great pride. There's also never been a time, unhappily, during the past 22 years, that this newspaper has been a business success.
The Herald was founded by William Randolph Hearst in 1903, and at one time it was the country's biggest afternoon daily. But it has operated in the red for more than 2 decades. Several months ago, the Hearst Corporation put it up for sale, but had no buyers.
The people who run the Herald, frankly, that is, the corporation, were never willing to spend the money necessary to really make a major effort to see could they, in fact, recapture the strong niche that the old Herald Express once had when it was the largest afternoon paper in the United States.
Employees will receive 60 days' pay, but most will not return to work tomorrow. As they wrote their last stories and said their final goodbyes, some were nostalgic, some angry.
The paper has been good to me. It's been good to my family. It's been good to the community. I think it's an excellent product, and it's just a shame that we weren't strong enough to make it.
At 11:30, these presses will begin to roll again. And in about 3 hours, they'll put out the last edition ever of the Los Angeles Herald Examiner. Sylvia Lopez, Channel 2 Action News.
Good evening. Sad news at the 11th hour. A very emotion-packed night for the people who work for the Herald Examiner. They found out today that tomorrow's edition will be the last. Our Patrick Healy is live at one of their favorite hangouts tonight. Patrick, what's the mood?
Well, Kelly and John, they seem to be taking it okay. You might be calling this the last staff meeting of the Herald Examiner at the tavern across the street. As you can imagine, it's been quite a night for the some 800 employees of number 2 newspaper, number 2, which will no longer be trying after the last press run at midnight. Reliving memories over here while across the street they are putting out the final edition of a newspaper with an 86-year history, the Herald Examiner.
As the presses awaited the final edition, it was as quiet as the morgue.
You're talking about 21 years of your life, you know, so it's pretty difficult to just walk away.
At the tavern across the street, a wake of sorts. Employees had long known the Herald Examiner was in trouble, but the end still came as a shock.
And it hurts me. It really does. My eyes are really swollen from crying all day.
The Herald Examiner made waves just this spring. Its stories on Mayor Bradley's finances led to investigations and drew the wrath of the mayor's office. But the paper had less than a fourth the readers of the LA Times. It was reported to be losing $2 million a month.
Despite inquiries from around the world and extensive discussions with numerous parties, we were unable to find a purchaser that could provide the financial capacity to sustain this business.
But in 1967, the paper was crippled by a devastating strike from which it never really recovered, though staffers struggled to keep it alive.
It was more of a cause than a job. We've wanted to keep something alive, you know, keep the spirit of this paper alive for people.
We had maybe a collection of characters here at the Herald, and I mean, it's maybe an old style of journalism that is dying here today.
It is the Herald's final scoop.
Some tell us job offers are already coming in. They say they'll bounce back, but the nation's number 2 city now finds itself reduced to being a one-newspaper town. Reporting live, Patrick Healy, Channel 4 News in downtown. Back to you.
Okay, Patrick, thank you very much.
It's over, the end of an era. And as it says so long, we say good evening, everybody. It's 5 o'clock. The Los Angeles Herald Examiner today slipped into oblivion. After its final edition hit the newsstands, Elaine Long has a report.
The press has stopped, and 118 years of the Herald Examiner came to an end. The final edition hit newsstands and became the hottest-selling newspaper today. Joe Stonovich received his usual 300 copies, but by 7:30 they were gone. The banner headline said it all.
It's sad. Sad that it's happening. I don't know why anybody doesn't want to take it over, but if I had the money, I'd do it.
By 9 o'clock, finding a final edition was tough.
It's gone, sir.
You're gone out? You can get more in?
No, I don't think so.
Heavy losses and a suitable buyer made the Hearst Corporation decide to fold. Emotional employees found out yesterday afternoon.
It has been a losing business, but it's always been a winning newspaper.
Danzig noted that competition from the LA Times, with a circulation 5 times that of the Herald, and other suburban newspapers cut into profits. The San Fernando Valley-based Daily News has targeted smaller communities and in the last 4 years aggressively pursued downtown LA and has seen a 20% growth rate in the past 2 years.
We'll see some circulation growth, probably not much in the way of advertising growth, because the advertisers that advertise in the Herald Examiner, for the most case, are also advertisers in our paper.
The LA Times expects to capitalize on the Herald circulation by publishing several features, including Miss Manners, Dr. Joyce Brothers, and 12 comic strips. Plus, for all the Herald sports fans, assistant publisher Jeff Klein says the Times hired Alan Malamud and Bob Mazursky. A bit of LA history dies with this final edition, and there is an air of sadness among the people buying their souvenir copy. So from them, so long, Herald Examiner. In Encino, I'm Elaine Long, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
The final edition of the Los Angeles Herald Examiner made quite a story in itself today. The mood at the newspaper is still one of shock. Jim Giggins was there as the news veterans began packing up.
Those employees who did come into the Herald Examiner offices today came to pack and say goodbye. Columnist Gordon Dillow has been here for 7 years. Business editor Kathleen Ingley for 6 years. Sports writer Mel Derslag has been here for half a century.
I'm starting my 50th year. In October, I passed my 49th year here. We're all kind of confused. This came on us pretty fast, and we haven't had a lot of time to gather ourselves.
That's the reason there are still so many stunned looks on the faces of those who were in the building today. Everyone knew the paper might go under, but not like it did.
Coming when it came, that was the shock. The way it came and fast, boom, like that.
And what a shock. Yesterday morning, there was the team effort of trying to keep the paper afloat. Today, the paper doesn't exist anymore.
The hardest thing was to walk past the front door today and see the signs posted that the Herald was closed. I think that was like a hit in the stomach.
For Linda Breakstone, who's been covering politics for the Herald for the past 11 years, the reality didn't sink in until this morning's final edition.
And I didn't cry till this morning. I opened the paper and I saw the Bramhall cartoon with the eagle from the masthead crying. That's when I started crying.
Many Herald Examiner employees may find new jobs quickly. The bulletin board is filled with information, and the company has its own job placement service. But no new job could have the history of the Herald Examiner. From the moment one steps into the lobby of the Herald Examiner building, there's a feeling of history. For example, there's this old printing press, an architecture the likes of which is seen nowhere else except Hearst Castle. The Herald Examiner was the oldest newspaper published in Los Angeles, tracing its origins back to the Los Angeles Daily Express, which started in 1871. William Randolph Hearst founded the Examiner in 1903 and merged it with the Herald and the Express. The Herald Examiner was established in 1962 when the Examiner and the Herald Express were united. All that is now history. Jim Giggins, Channel 4 News, Los Angeles.
And out on the streets, the last edition of the Herald Examiner snapped up quickly, everyone wanting to grab up a collector's item. At one newsstand in Sherman Oaks, people were lined up to buy the paper as it came off the truck, and sales were being limited.
Just one. I can't have two, please.
It's just something nostalgic about it. I figure it's got to mean something.
Finally, the newsstand operator decided to sell his own personal copy of the last issue. The selling price, $50.
How much? 50. 50 bucks?
Yeah.
Well, probably does. I'll take the time.
By the way, someone eventually did buy that final copy of the last edition, and the newsstand worker got his price, 50 bucks.
The end of the Herald Examiner triggers concern about the other smaller newspapers still being published for those of us here in Southern California. Phil Schuman is in the newsroom now with a status report on those papers. Phil?
Well, Colleen, Jess, there's no question that regular readers of the Herald have suffered a loss, and there were about 200,000 of those a day. But there are many other newspapers than the Times available. They're alive and well if you're out looking for one.
The Daily News, already beating the Herald's circulation on Sundays, may gain the most from the Herald's demise. This 88-year-old San Fernando Valley-based publication is wasting no time in trying to take advantage of its opportunity. The vending machines reminding prospective customers there is a choice.
I think that there is a good prospect of us selling more newspapers and selling more advertising. I don't know how much more. Typically, when a newspaper dies in a city, some of the readers simply disappear.
In addition to the Daily News, there are a number of smaller newspapers flourishing in Southern California, in Long Beach, in Pasadena, in the South Bay, in Orange County, in Glendale, to name just a few. We talked with a journalism and a business professor at Cal State Northridge about what those papers have in common. They say the key to their future is a continued emphasis on the news affecting their specific communities.
Well, it's to their advantage to have a major competitor drop out of the market, but I think that in terms of the news reportage in the community, I think it's bad for the competition because it doesn't provide the kind of competition that the major companies need.
You normally can't do well in the American market as a Me Too product, and unless you've got some differential advantage that puts you ahead of the others, you're going to either die or do very poorly.
So it seems clear that in this day and age in the newspaper business, smaller can be better. After all, a newspaper is a product, just like a newscast or a can of Coke. And the more that product is tailored to meet the needs of a specific group of consumers, the better its chances of success.
For example, back at the Daily News, there are now several editions of the paper aimed at different communities, the same way the LA Times has different editions.
Many people get a lot of the national and international news that they want, either from the all-news radio, for television news, from cable news. What we can do for them is give them some more depth on those stories.
And Bob Burdick and the others that we talked with said that the Herald folded primarily because of its inability to adapt and to realize that it couldn't compete with the LA Times the way it was, had to make radical changes. And they say the smaller papers will grow to fill that void, but they have to remember that they are designed for their local readers, and they can't be all things to all people. Jess, Colleen?
Thanks, Phil. And this news today, the final edition of the Los Angeles Herald, the Herald Examiner, sold out almost as soon as it hit the streets this morning. John Marshall says it was snapped up by readers seeking a piece of history.
The newspaper said it went out of business because not enough people bought it. Ironically, today's circulation was the best in years. For many readers, it seemed to be a last chance to say goodbye to an old friend and companion. As the last load of the last edition arrived at the Sherman Oaks newsstand this morning, customers were lined up, quarters ready.
25 cents, just one.
The last of 86 years of daily editions seemed to be a collector's item already.
Just one.
I can't have two. Please. One.
Then there were no more, forever.
They're all sold out. Okay.
Can I get any more? I feel very sad. I'm even crying.
Finally, the newsstand operator decided he would sell his own personal copy of the last issue. The asking price, $50.
How much?
50.
50 bucks?
Yeah.
One problem, I'll take the time.
Then along came 43-year-old Don Dufford, who found no copies in Pasadena where he lived, so he stopped here on the way to work.
I think it's a shame that the Herald X is going out of business. I think that the people in Los Angeles will miss a lot. And this is a piece of history, and I've wanted a piece of history today.
Sometimes when we suddenly lose an old friend, we realize all the things we should have said to them, but somehow never got around to doing it. Maybe in this case, some of us will think of all the issues of the Herald we should have bought, but didn't. John Marshall, Channel 4 News, Sherman Oaks.
Oh, that's sad. And what was it like at the newspaper offices today as the workers prepared to close up shop? Well, Jim Giggins has that part of the story.
Those employees who did come into the Herald Examiner offices today came to pack and say goodbye. Columnist Gordon Dillow has been here for 7 years. Business editor Kathleen Ingley for 6 years. Sports writer Mel Derslag has been here for half a century.
I'm starting my 50th year. In October, I passed my 49th year here. We're all kind of confused. This came on us pretty fast, and we haven't had a lot of time to gather ourselves.
That's the reason there are still so many stunned looks on the faces of those who were in the building today. Everyone knew the paper might go under, but not like it did. Yesterday morning, there was the team effort of trying to keep the paper afloat. Today, the paper doesn't exist anymore.
The hardest thing was to walk past the front door today and see the signs posted that the Herald was closed. I think that was like a hit in the stomach.
For Linda Breakstone, who's been covering politics for the Herald for the past 11 years, the reality didn't sink in until this morning's final edition.
And I didn't cry till this morning. I opened the paper and I saw the Bramhall cartoon with the eagle from the masthead crying. That's when I started crying.
From the moment one steps into the lobby of the Herald Examiner building, there's a feeling of history. For example, there's this old printing press, an architecture the likes of which is seen nowhere else except Hearst Castle. The Herald Examiner was the oldest newspaper published in Los Angeles, tracing its origins back to the Los Angeles Daily Express, which started in 1871. All that is now history. Jim Giggins, Channel 4 News, Los Angeles.
So long. And when it got down to the newsstand operator's personal copy, the only one remaining, he sold it for $50.
This is a piece of history, and I've wanted a piece of history today.
Staffers at the newspaper noted somewhat bitterly the pity the demand came too late to save the newspaper. And what takes the Herald Examiner's place? The Daily News may now become the alternative to the Times, the eternally dominant newspaper. Daily News vending machines seem to anticipate the situation, reminding readers there is a choice.
I think that there is a good prospect of us selling more newspapers and selling more advertising. I don't know how much more. Typically, when a newspaper dies in a city, some of the readers simply disappear.
There are other strong newspapers, but their strength is in the attention they pay to the communities they serve. Long Beach, Pasadena, Orange County, and the South Bay. It's unlikely any of the regional newspapers would risk their solid home base to try to establish themselves as a Los Angeles newspaper, and none seems ready to take on the Times, which in its own editorials today noted it now has a special responsibility to be fair, accurate, and complete since the loss of its major competitor. Kelly, John?
All right. Thank you, Jess.
And tonight, so long to the paper that once broke so many important local stories. As Harvey Levin reports, the Herald Examiner published its last edition this morning, leaving Los Angeles with only one newspaper now.
Today, after the press has stopped for the last time, many people feared the prospect of Los Angeles becoming a one-newspaper town.
Who's going to keep the Times honest when it comes to covering City Hall, in doing that digging that, in dusty records that has to be done?
At times, the Herald led the pack in breaking important stories. It was the Herald that first told the story behind Eula Love's death at the hands of an LAPD officer. That led to the LAPD clarifying its shooting policies. It was the Herald that exposed serious mismanagement at the RTD. And most recently, it was the Herald that broke the story about Mayor Tom Bradley's personal finances. John Schwada was the Herald reporter who aggressively covered the Bradley story. He thinks the Herald had it over the LA Times when it came to City Hall coverage.
I can walk down the hall at City Hall and see lots of bureaucrats that I know, and they'll say hi to me. I've walked down the halls with Times reporters, and they don't know these people.
I think that it reduces competition, it reduces options of the public, and that's the principle.
Are there hard feelings there?
I think I have to separate the principle that I just enunciated for you from any personal experiences I may have had.
The Herald's tough, sometimes critical sports writers improved local teams, so says former basketball star Jerry West.
They help keep you on your toes, and they, I think, make you look to improve your team.
Harvey Levin, Channel 2 Action News.
Empty spaces, a lot of newsstands tomorrow morning.
Good evening, everyone. A shocking announcement today that the Los Angeles Herald Examiner is going out of business. After more than 80 years, the newspaper will cease publication tomorrow. The Herald Examiner has been plagued by money problems and was said to be losing about $1.5 million a month. So the announcement didn't come as a real surprise to its 800 workers, but it was a shock nonetheless. The owners said they couldn't find a buyer.
Despite inquiries from around the world and extensive discussions with numerous parties, we were unable to find a purchaser that could provide the financial capacity to sustain this business.
Take the wind out of your sails, a little nervous, a little worried, but I'll survive.
This newspaper was actually started by William Randolph Hearst back in 1903. By the mid-60s, it was the nation's largest afternoon daily, and of course then came the decline. Employees were told they will receive 60 days severance pay.
And columnist Alan Malamud, whose notes on a scorecard column is already on the streets in the Bulldog edition of tomorrow's Times, kind of like when John Robinson went to the Rams from USC. Exactly.
Thanks a lot.
Congratulations to Alan Malamud.
Yeah, look forward to reading him.
And let's hope our other survivors.
Read all about it. Those who make that cry familiar made news themselves today. The final edition of the Los Angeles Herald Examiner hit the newsstands today, but it wasn't there for very long. It was the same scene all over town. People got up early looking for the Herald Examiner, but the final edition was hard to find. Newsstands across the city were sold out early, and lots of people went home empty-handed.
I'm trying to find it. All the vending machines were out of Heralds early this morning, and came up here and decided to look for one, and nothing.
For me, it was a real loss for a source of information. I'm going to miss it.
The writers, those writers were magnificent, the best in the lot. You know, they broke all the good stories. What are we going to do without them?
But if you did find a paper, the headline said it all. So long, L.A. The Herald sold 130,000 more papers today than usual. Regular readers were buying the papers as collector's items. Others were buying them to resell, reportedly for as much as $50 each. At the Herald building, flags were flying at half-staff. The Herald ended its 86-year run with a special press run this afternoon. Customers were lined up outside, and Herald Examiner writers were going home for the last time. Gordon Dillow has been at the paper for 7 years.
In his last column, he writes about a feeling many of us can share, how it will be hard to leave the paper behind.
Sort of strange. Today would have been the day I'd write for Friday. And I woke up this morning, and for a minute I thought, gosh, what am I going to do today? And then I realized, no, I don't have to write one for the first time in years, so it's rough.
In the newspaper business, it's called a 30, end of story. The Los Angeles Herald Examiner may be gone, but it's anything but forgotten.
What will I do without it? That's what I want to know. Let's find out. Let's get it back.
There's already been an attempt to get the Herald Examiner back. Early this evening, the Hearst Corporation turned down an offer from 3 local businessmen to take over the paper, rename it, and turn it into a tabloid. Hearst executives said the offer wasn't enough.
The hundreds of Examiner employees weren't the only ones affected by the paper's closing. In fact, there is still plenty of money to be made on the Herald. That is, if you can find a copy.
I've been looking for a paper all day.
That cry was heard all over Los Angeles today, and as some people scrambled to buy one last copy of the Herald Examiner, others gave new meaning to the newspaper cry, extra, extra.
What you have? $10. $10? No, maybe not.
I bought them, so if I can turn around and sell them for whatever I want, if I can make a little money off of it, why not?
But while these entrepreneurs were making a killing, many local businesses were thinking about the loss of 800 customers in an already depressed area of downtown L.A.
A lot of people come 3 or 4 times a day. We have very good relationship with those people.
I don't know now. I don't know what's going to do. I'm very sad. I'm very shocked. This week it's okay, but next week I don't know what's going to do. I'm very sad.
The losers and the winners in today's Examiner sweepstakes did have one thing in common. They all agreed that if the paper had been as popular as it was today, it would never have gone under.
You know, the Herald printed 1.5 million copies of today's final edition.
Good evening. Top story in the news this day. Los Angeles is reeling from word that one of its major daily newspapers is shutting down. After 86 years in print, the Herald Examiner will cease publication after tomorrow's final edition. Jim Giggins explains why.
There were tears and hugs and looks of bewilderment at the Herald Examiner this afternoon.
I'm an outside salesperson, so I was notified by a beeper that we all carry, and I called in, and our secretary just said that, come on in, they're closing the paper.
Started like everything else with a rumor coming down that we had people here from New York. They'd make an announcement at 9, then again at 11, and we found out classified manager came in and said it'd be shut down.
Many of the people losing their jobs had worked here most of their adult lives, like prize-winning photographer Michael Hearing.
How long have you been at the Herald? 21 years. How do you feel today? Take the wind out of your sails.
City Hall reporter John Schwada broke the story of Mayor Tom Bradley's tangled finances.
Yeah, I think the Times is going to carry that story on. I hope they will.
They didn't pick it up at the beginning.
No, they didn't.
The Herald Examiner was always scrappy and often brilliant, but none of this was enough to save the paper. It all came down to the bottom line.
There's never been a day in the past 12 years, including today. There's also never been a time, unhappily, during the past 22 years, that this newspaper has been a business success. Despite inquiries from around the world and extensive discussions with numerous parties, we were unable to find a purchaser that could provide the financial capacity to sustain this business.
One of the Herald's main problems was increased competition from regional newspapers like the Orange County Register and the Daily News, which made it even more difficult to turn a profit. With the Herald Examiner goes a bit of Los Angeles history. It was started by William Randolph Hearst in 1903. The days of Hearst and Marion Davies and the Hearst Castle were the glory years for the paper. The Herald Examiner was the nation's largest afternoon daily by 1967, before the decline began. Jim Giggins, Channel 4 News, Los Angeles.
Sad that the quality of this newspaper didn't give us great pride. There's also never been a time, unhappily, during the past 22 years, that this newspaper has been a business success.
With that announcement, 831 employees learned they were out of a job and that Los Angeles would be without a second metropolitan newspaper. Many employees reacted with tears and shock.
It's sad because the paper had a lot of good guts inside it. It was a strong paper, and I hate to see it go. I really do.
You know, it doesn't feel like it's set in yet.
The paper rivaled the LA Times until 1967 when it was hit by a bitter 10-year strike. Hearst executives suggest the paper never recovered from the strike. But some employees today blame the Hearst Corporation for years of neglect.
They just didn't have the commitment. They got a lot of other things going, the Hearst Corporation does, and they didn't need this paper.
But despite the gloomy financial picture and outdated equipment, many employees say they stayed at the Herald Examiner because it was a special place.
We like to think of ourselves as it sounds corny, but a small band of commandos. You got the LA Times up the street from us, which is a juggernaut, a Leviathan, and the Herald Examiner is, we run a scrappy paper on not too much of a budget and not a big staff.
Those of us who just decided we didn't want to be paid that much and we didn't care about the equipment, but we just really wanted to leave every day laughing, we worked at the Herald.
The Herald Examiner was founded by William Randolph Hearst back in 1903, a continuation of another Los Angeles paper dating back to the 1870s. For 118 years, reporting on the life and times of Los Angeles.
May not be able to get it into the paper tomorrow, and if I don't get it in the paper tomorrow, it's not going to ever appear in the Herald Examiner.
In downtown Los Angeles, Pat Anson, News 13.
The Herald Examiner was just what it sounded like, two combined papers. As Pat reported, the Hearst Corporation started the Examiner in 1903, but it didn't merge with the Herald until 1962. The Herald started publishing way back in 1872, 9 years before the Los Angeles Times. We are losing the longest continuously publishing daily in Southern California history. It's a very sad loss.
It's been a cause to a lot of people. It's been a cause for me. I mean...
And you're a second-generation Herald person.
Second generation, right. My dad's been here, was here for, I think he started like 1946.
Andy's dad is veteran sports writer Bud Ferrillo. Some things, it seems, never change. The city room was as busy today at deadline time as it was back in the days when the Black Dahlia, Mickey Cohen, and the Red Light Bandit were headline makers. That was the era when the legendary Aggie Underwood kept a baseball bat next to her desk to remind reporters who the boss was. She was the first female city editor in American history. The Herald leaves Los Angeles with one of its most important stories unfinished. It scooped every other news organization by being the first to report the possibility of financial improprieties in the mayor's office, a story that will ultimately determine how history remembers Tom Bradley. For those of us who remember those grand old days of 6 editions a day when we got most of our information from a daily newspaper, for those of us who stood out on streets like this and shouted extra, extra, read all about it, today is more than just the end of an era, more than just the death of an institution. We are all losing a part of ourselves. In downtown Los Angeles, Tony Valdez, Fox News.
After tomorrow, the Herald Examiner will be just a memory to everyone who made the newspaper possible. Tonight, some employees ended the workday like they have so many other nights across the street from the Herald at Corky's. And most agreed that they weren't surprised by today's announcements.
I kept thinking somebody out there wants to buy this paper because there was clearly a market for it and it could have been made profitable. And I never really believed that they would just close it down without anybody being willing to pick it up.
I knew that it was going to happen. I didn't know when. And frankly, I was a little relieved that it was now. I didn't want the Herald to go on to the proverbial life support system and just become, you know, really substandard. I wanted it to die when it was still great.
I expected it eventually, but it's always a shock. It's like having a terminally ill relative somehow. No matter how sick they are, you're still shocked when they finally die.
The closing down of the Herald may unfortunately mean the end of many of the surrounding businesses, including Corky's Bar.